Hey everyone, today we're taking a look at a very different looking Dead by Daylight. In DBD's patch 8.7.0, it is slated to look quite different from how it currently does, and this is happening in a few ways. Alongside this, we've got a brand new survivor with some interesting perks, some very interesting lore, and almost a complete rework and overhaul to lore in general, as well as the quest system. So let's get into it. First of all, I did want to talk about the new survivor, Orela Rose. It was a character I was theorizing a lot about. I made a lot of posts about it, and my initial thoughts was that she was somehow going to be tied to a Greenville in some way, and this did end up happening slightly, so I'm sort of happy I managed to predict something for once, a little, not really. I just feel happy I got some sort of vague connection in there. I don't think I've ever done that before, so I was happy about that personally. Also, I was really happy overall to see the return of teasers. This is something it feels like we've barely gotten over the past year or so, ever since The Unknown came out with All Things Wicked. That chapter had amazing teasers, and so seeing them return for this one, and also connect somewhat to Greenville, as well as Sable, was really cool to see. So I do hope in the future they do more of this, particularly for original chapters. I understand if licensed ones can't quite be like this, but I do hope for original chapters they decide to do more teasers. Anyway, big tangent there. New survivor, Orela Rose. The way Orela is actually connected to Sable and Greenville is through listening to her podcast, which was called All Things Wicked This Night. It's actually why Orela has these t-shirts with All Things Wicked printed on the t-shirts themselves. I do like this too though, because obviously the chapter was also called All Things Wicked, so it looks like she's sort of just wearing DBD merch. I really liked where they went with the story too, and I really liked how they connected Orela to different characters like Sable. But they also name dropped people like Cliff Barra and Alex Damaro. It was like back-to-back name drops, which I thought was quite funny. But it also made me think maybe we get some of these characters in the game eventually, quite possibly. Maybe someone like Alex. The gist of the lore though is that Orela had this friend called Emily, someone who helps her through her transition, with them becoming very good friends. Together they decide to open up a haunted house type of place, and one of the sort of attractions of the haunted house is sort of a fake electroshock therapy scene. So Emily would strap herself into this sort of electroshock therapy device, obviously not real, but then one day it malfunctions and it kills her. Orela calls an ambulance, but as they arrive, Emily dies. This then causes Orela to want to become a paramedic herself. She goes and trains and she becomes one. She then saves a billionaire, and in return this billionaire funds her dream essentially of starting up a horror-themed restaurant inspired by Alex Damaro and Cliff Barra. One of these events is then themed around a story about a mysterious fog that transports people to another dimension, and this ends up doing essentially just that. A fog appears, it envelops Orela, and then she hears Emily calling out from the fog, baiting her in. So that's that. I think it's a really good entry. I do think it's quite interesting the direction they went with it, and I really like how sort of unique it is in its approach. There's the idea of these two friends wanting to start up a horror themed restaurant and, you know, starting a haunted house together, I just think is very cool. Sort of merging their skills to create this, I think is really cool. And of course it's always great to get more representation in the game. I think overall it's a really positive addition. I think Orela fits the game very well, and I'm really excited to see her come to life. Moving on to her perks, and honestly I think they've done really well with them, even though they're very healing focused, which upon initially hearing I'm sure a lot of people were worried about, but they're incredibly well done I think. Do No Harm is her first one. When you heal another survivor, for each hook state they have, heal 50% faster and gain 3% progress for succeeding great skill checks. This seems like a solid addition. I don't think it's going to be that powerful. I think a lot of people are worried about this one. I think it's going to be fine. I think stacking could come into play, but I think that's the whole fun of it, right? So I think that's completely fine. A Duty of Care I do think is the strongest one. When you take a protection hit while healthy, all other survivors within 16 meters gain 25% haste for 6 seconds. Now this is a very strong sort of altruism anti-tunnel perk, but again, I think it's fine. It can't really be abused, I think, necessarily. At least it's going to take a very particular build to do that with this, so I think as it is, it's actually sort of fine. Maybe it can have a very small exhausted effect, like 4 seconds, just to stop you from sort of, I don't know, like doing it back to back so easily. I don't know, maybe like a very short exhaustion effect or something. Then the final one is actually an exhaustion perk, Rapid Response. When you do a fast locker exit, you suffer from the exhausted status for 30 seconds. When you gain exhausted, you see the killer's aura for 2 seconds. So the idea behind this seems to be almost like an exhaustion support perk. It's meant to be so you're pairing it up with another exhaustion perk, say Sprint Burst. I tried this out a little bit actually in my matches, and it was decently useful. So you use your Sprint Burst for sort of like traversal, and then you can see where the killer is. It's like this sort of, you know, routine location tool. I imagine it could also be decently useful in chase as well. Say you've just vaulted something with life and you want to sort of see which direction the killer goes from there, you can sort of make the most of your life. I'm not sure though if it's going to be that good. I don't think it's particularly good. I think it's a nice thing to have, but I do wish the numbers were maybe buffed a little bit to like 5 seconds or something. I can't really see many situations where that would be overly powerful, if I'm being completely honest. Also, there's just so many exhaustion perks I just don't think quite work well with this. Like, if you've just used Head On, for example, you stun the killer, it's like, the aura's not going to help. I don't know, there's situations where I just think it's just not enough. It's not enough of a duration, I think, personally. But we can see. So that's essentially the new Survivor. And one of the things, sorry, I want to touch on this quickly too. I really like how they allowed you to see all of her cosmetics in the store, inside of the PTB. Whilst it's nice waiting, it is also nice just being able to see the whole character, seeing everything she's got to wear. I think that's really nice. I like that they did that. So now moving on to something making Dead by Daylight look very different and something quite controversial, but something not necessarily getting any pushback directly, and that's the new Rarity tiers. So what they've done is they've changed Rarity now. It used to go from yellow to green to purple, now it goes from green to blue to purple. Brown tier is still the same, the common tier, and then the new top tier that used to be ultra rare is now called Visceral. They've mixed up a few of their old names and Rarity naming conventions up with different areas of the game. It's a little confusing, I'm going to be honest, for now it's a little bit confusing. If you go over to cosmetics now, there's legendary cosmetics, there's still a bunch of tiers. I'm still a little bit confused by it all, if I'm being entirely honest. There's like a gold tier, there's also like a white tier, there's a pink tier. It's still a little bit confusing, especially on the cosmetic side. But what I assume they were going for when they did this is they were trying to normalize the Rarity sort of color conventions. For most games, or particularly like, you know, how tiers or Rarity have been popularized across gaming is usually in that sort of format of green to blue to purple. Blue means rare, purple means very rare, green means like common or something, right? Generally speaking in gaming, that's how these Rarity conventions go. So I think that's all they're doing. I think because Five Nights at Freddy's is coming, and there's probably going to be a big player influx, they want to make things as easy as possible to pick up and learn. It's also probably why they're doing things like giving free items to new survivors when they've just joined the game. They want the process to be a bit more seamless when you're joining up to the game. It may seem a bit silly from a long-time player's perspective to see these changes and go, oh, why would they do this? They made sense. But, you know, as a longer time player, you're not going to see it in the way a new player does. I'm sure when a new player joins, they might be like, oh, why is it yellow, green, purple, and then pink? And, you know, it could happen. I'm sure there's a reason they're doing this, essentially. And it's one of those things as well, I think, that will probably be looked back on in retrospect with a much more positive view, because if we think back to when they changed movement, for example, everyone got really upset about that when they changed the old movement animations and the old HUD. But nowadays, it's something that's definitely improved the game. Maybe there was a bit of a vibe loss, but overall, it was a big improvement to the game. And again, it's something I'm sure helped new players out, so I think this is going to be no different. This brings me on to our next section, which is to do with the lore or the archive system, as well as the rifts. This part I'm not so hot on, and it's a case where it's not even down to the function of it, it's mainly down to the visual or the aesthetic side of it. What they've done now is they've separated the archive quests and they've put them all into a sort of a quest log list in the menus. So you can click on this list and you can see a big list of all the quests you've got to do. and when you go into game, you can do all of these all at once. In that way, I do like this system. This is a really nice system. Allowing you to finally bulk complete quests is a really great idea, and this was something I was doing in my games too. When I was going into my matches, there was just quests popping up, they were completing. I had no idea what the quests even were, but I was completing a bunch, which was really nice. And then you get out of the game and a bunch of BP rewards pop up. It's a very nice system. It's super streamlined, it's way more efficient. Again, probably going to be great for when new players come around. The archives, you know, looked incredibly intimidating, I imagine, to a new player, with their like 20 tomes and all these past rifts with 4 tiers. This new system is much more simple. But with that said, it's a lot less visually pleasing, or it's less visually in line with Dead by Daylight's aesthetic, I think. The whole web we had before works so well, I think, for the challenges, jumping from node to node in this sort of web-like way, which is something very similar to the blood web almost, which makes me think now, I really hope they don't get rid of the blood web. You know, as much as I want blood web leveling to be streamlined, I really wouldn't want them to get rid of the blood web itself, so I hope that's not happening. It's one of those things, I just think there's sort of a certain aesthetic gone. I do realize though that nowadays it's more efficient this way, and for that, again, I think it's a huge positive. It just makes me sad they've lost that sort of the whole area of the game where it felt so mysterious and sort of creepy, and I don't know, it had such a good vibe and it felt so fitting, I think. One small note about the quests popping up in game that I wasn't such a fan of is that sometimes it's a little bit too much when they just repeatedly pop up. You know, you happen to complete multiple back-to-back and they keep popping up. It gets a little bit annoying, so I hope you can turn these off in some capacity. That's like a super nitpicky note, by the way. The other thing that worried me a bit about this update is that I don't know where the lore's gone. The tome lore that's meant to be in the game, it's just not viewable anywhere. There is a tab that currently doesn't work. It's called like the archive or tome tab or something. However, at the moment we couldn't view it, so we don't know what it looks like. I'm not sure if it's just going to be the books that were there before, you know, the tome books that you could click on, see the lore inside. I'm not sure if it's going to be like that, but we couldn't view it, which means at the moment, if they bring that to live, and they're not going to add that just yet, that means you can't view tome lore in game anymore, which is pretty rough, I think. I'm assuming, however, that it's just a placement thing. It just would have been nice to view it for the PTB, but I trust they're gonna, you know, get it out for launch and it'll all be fine. One thing I really hope they do with this now that they've made this new quest system and new lore system, I hope they finally allow for a much more efficient delivery of the lore, because one of the issues of the lore before was that it was so confusing to find within the tomes. It was confusing what you needed to unlock to get the lore you wanted. It was confusing whether characters even had lore. If you didn't like sort of go online or the wiki, it could be tough to know if the character you're playing as even had tome lore, because like where do you even find it? Where does it say it? It doesn't really. So I really hope one thing they do is they streamline this and they somehow have a tab somewhere on a character's bio that tells you, oh, this person has tome lore, do you want to read it? Or they just add the tome lore to the character page. I don't know, something like that. I hope they connect it somehow. Or just even in the new archive tab where all the tomes are, if they just order them properly or order them by name so you can just find the character you want far easier, that would be great. Rather than having to click on them and figure out, okay, so is Meg in tome 7 or is she in tome 3, or, you know, trying to click through all these different tomes that all have jumbled lore entries as well to try and find the character you want. It just seems a bit ridiculous. So I hope they sort of manage to streamline this. I hope this is a step in that direction, which I think it is. Overall, great changes. I'm just a little upset about the vibe being lost, but again, maybe that's something that changes with time. I just think it's a bit of a shame. The final thing to mention is this new thing with haste perks and hindered perks being changed around. They're basically changing how haste and hindered stacking works. Honestly, this stuff is all really confusing me. It confused me as it was to begin with, so I'm not the right person to really talk about this, but I trust they're gonna make it better. I didn't really notice much difference when I was playing on the PTB. One thing I did notice was that now when you use a haste perk, or you get hindered, it actually pops up on your screen how much you're getting sped up or slowed down by. So when you use sprint burst, you get like a 50% appearing. That's really great. Again, another really great thing that's gonna help new players too. Then everything else else seemed good. All the perk changes seem pretty fine. I like that they buff Boondock Theory. That's one that's been sort of bugging me for a while now. The killer changes look good as well, the sort of small reworks they've done. Overall, just a really solid update. But wow, does Dead by Daylight look different with these few tweaks. I do hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts below as well. I'm very interested to hear what all of you have to say about these updates. Do you like DBD in blue? Let me know down below. Thanks and goodbye.